A girl vanished in 1990, and the case went cold. 22 years later, her father opens an old yearbook and finds 3 words that were never meant to be forgotten. As buried memories resurface, so do the lies holding his marriage together. Because sometimes the most dangerous secret isn't who took your child, it's who helped you stop looking. Follow the truth as it unravels a marriage built on silence, and discover how far love will go to protect a lie. Read the next chapter now. The house was quieter than it had any right to be. Boxes lined the living room like unsolved questions, each one filled with the small, stubborn evidence of a life already lived. He moved slowly, knees stiff, breath measured, deciding what deserved to be kept and what could finally be thrown away. Most of it belonged to her, or to the version of himself who had once believed time would make this easier. The yearbook fell out of a box without ceremony, landing face down on the carpet. 1990, stamped in fading gold. He stood there longer than necessary before bending to pick it up, as if the book might accuse him once opened. He hadn't seen it in years, maybe decades. He told himself he was only curious, that it was harmless to look. He flipped through the pages without reading at first. Smiling faces, awkward haircuts. Teachers he vaguely remembered scolding halls that no longer existed. His daughter appeared halfway through, younger than he remembered her, eyes bright in a way that felt almost painful now. He traced the photo with his thumb, guilt arriving uninvited, settling heavy in his chest. That was when he noticed the writing. It wasn't large or dramatic. Just 3 words, pressed lightly into the margin beside her picture, written in blue ink that had softened with age. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. Not hers, not anyone he recognized. He leaned closer, heart ticking louder, rereading the words until their meaning shifted from harmless to impossible. Meet me after. After what? After school. After dinner. After the last lie, he told the police. His mind began assembling memories he had spent years dismantling. The night she disappeared returned in flashes. A slammed door, headlights cutting across the driveway, his wife's voice calling her name with irritation instead of fear. He remembered assuming rebellion, teenage drama, the belief that she would come back once she cooled off. He remembered how long it took before panic replaced patience. He flipped backward, scanning other pages, margins, signatures. Nothing else stood out. Only that note. Only that quiet invitation frozen in ink. His hands shook now, the book heavier than it should have been. He wondered how many times he had handled this yearbook before without seeing it, or if he had seen it and chosen not to remember. The house seemed to hold its breath with him. Somewhere down the hall, his wife moved, the soft sound of cabinets opening and closing. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds. He closed the yearbook carefully, as if it might escape, and stared at the cover. He felt the old instinct rise, the one that urged him to protect what remained by pretending nothing had changed. It whispered that marriages survived on selective memory, that fathers survived on forgiveness. But the ink refused to fade, and neither did the question now beating against his ribs. For the first time in 22 years, he wasn't sure silence was protecting either of them. Morning came quietly, as it always did now. He poured the coffee while she buttered toast, their movements choreographed by decades of repetition. No words were necessary to know who reached for which mug. No glances lingered long enough to invite questions. This was how they kept things intact, by treating silence like courtesy. She sat at the table, folding the newspaper in half, skimming headlines without reading them. Her hair had gone almost entirely gray, though she still colored it once every few months, insisting it made her feel put together. He watched her from the counter, noticing how she avoided facing the living room, where the boxes still waited. Where the yearbook sat hidden beneath old photo albums. "You sleep all right?" she asked, voice casual, careful. "Fine," he said. The lie slid out easily. It always had. They drank their coffee in short sips. The clock above the sink ticked too loudly. He wondered if she could hear his pulse the way he could. Every ordinary sound felt amplified, as if the house itself knew something had shifted overnight. He thought about telling her, just mentioning the yearbook, just enough to test the water. But memory intervened, sharp and corrective. He remembered the first year after their daughter disappeared, how every conversation became a minefield. How grief turned them brittle, how questions felt like accusations. They learned slowly that survival required restraint. She stood and rinsed her mug, back still turned to him. "I'm going to run errands later," she said. "We're out of detergent." "Okay." Another pause. He searched her posture for signs, tension, guilt, recognition, but found only the familiar stiffness of age. Or something practiced enough to resemble it. "You're going through old things again," she said lightly, not a question. "A bit," she nodded once. "Just don't wear yourself out." Concern without curiosity. It was one of her talents. He carried his mug to the sink, standing closer than necessary. For a moment, he imagined reaching out, touching her shoulder, asking her what she remembered about that year. About the last time they saw their daughter alive. The image collapsed under its own weight. They had made a quiet agreement long ago, never spoken aloud. Certain details were dangerous. Certain memories were better kept intact by never being examined too closely. When the police stopped calling, when the neighbors stopped whispering, they folded the past into a manageable shape and built their marriage around it. She gathered her purse and keys, pausing at the doorway. "I'll be back before lunch," she said. "Drive safe." The door closed softly behind her. He stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from him. The coffee had gone cold. From the living room came the faint, imagined pull of the yearbook, waiting. He realized then that their marriage hadn't survived because they were strong. It had survived because neither of them had dared to ask the wrong question. He picked up the mug again, poured it out, and rinsed it twice. The note's blue ink seemed to hover behind his eyes. By the time she returned, he knew something would have to be said. Silence had shifted from refuge to threat, and it was already loosening its grip, whether he was ready or not. Yet. He carried the yearbook to the dining table and opened it like something fragile, something that might break if handled too honestly. Sunlight cut through the blinds, striping the pages in pale gold. He ignored the ache in his back, the slow protest of his hands, and focused on the ink. 3 words, pressed softly, deliberately. "Meet me after." He traced the letters again, this time studying the shape of them. The careful spacing, the slant. It was teenage handwriting, he was sure of it. Earnest, confident. Someone who believed time would always be generous. It was not his daughter's hand, though he knew hers well. She looped her G's differently. She rushed her T's. This was someone else reaching into her margins. After what, he asked, the empty room? After school made the most sense. After the bell, after the lockers slammed and the halls emptied. After the day officially ended, but before parents started asking questions. His chest tightened as the implications settled. He flipped to the back of the book, scanning signatures. Jokes. Phone numbers without area codes. Promises to stay in touch that never survived the summer. He looked for familiar names, pausing when something tugged at his memory, then moving on. The note stayed singular, stubborn. The past began to leak in around the edges. He saw the front door of their old house, paint chipped even then. He heard the argument replay itself, sharper now than it had been in years. His daughter standing in the hallway, arms crossed, insisting she'd be back soon. His wife at the kitchen counter, jaw tight, telling her not to be late. He remembered siding with calm, with reason, with letting things cool. The door had slammed harder than necessary. A car idled down the street, bass humming faintly through the windows. He had noticed it then, registered it without meaning. Teenagers came and went. He remembered thinking nothing of it. Remembered how easily he had turned back to the television. Time telescoped cruelly. Midnight arrived without her. Then 1 a.m. the phone stayed silent. By the time panic arrived, it felt theatrical, almost embarrassing. He had told himself she was punishing them, proving a point. He told the police the same thing, his voice steady, cooperative. They asked about boyfriends, parties, trouble. He offered guesses instead of facts. Now the yearbook rested open like an accusation. Meet me after was not a tantrum. It was a plan. He studied the margins again, searching for indentations, for erased lines, for anything else he might have missed. His hands trembled, though he couldn't say whether it was age or fear. He wondered how many times truth announced itself quietly, only to be ignored by people desperate for ordinary explanations. The house creaked as it settled. Outside, a car passed, its engine lingering a second too long before fading. His pulse jumped stupidly in response. He closed his eyes and saw the girl she had been, trusting enough to believe someone would keep their word. When he opened them, the ink looked darker somehow, as if fed by his attention. He knew now that the night she disappeared had not been empty. It had been crowded with intention, with choice. He closed the yearbook slowly. Somewhere beneath the years, a promise waited, unkept. And for the first time, he understood that forgetting had never been the same thing as not knowing. He listened for his wife's car, counting seconds, knowing that once she returned, the past would no longer belong to him alone, and the questions would begin breathing aloud. She came home carrying groceries, the smell of detergent and apples filling the kitchen. He watched her set the bags down, watched the practiced efficiency of her movements, and felt the weight of the yearbook pressing against his ribs though it wasn't in the room. He told himself to be careful, to be kind. "While you were out," he said, "I found her yearbook." She didn't look up. "I figured you might." He waited for more. When it didn't come, he continued. "There's something written in it, in the margins." That made her pause, just briefly. A hitch so small he might have missed it if he weren't already looking. She straightened, smoothed her hands on her jeans, and finally met his eyes. "Those books are full of nonsense," she said. "Kids scribble all sorts of things. It says, 'Meet me after.'" She frowned, the expression practiced, almost gentle. "After what? That's what I'm asking." She shrugged, returning to the groceries. "After school, probably, or after a game. You're reading too much into it." He felt the floor tilt slightly. "You don't remember it. There's nothing to remember." She stacked cans in the pantry with more force than necessary. "We went over all of this years ago. We went over what the police asked," he said. "That's not the same thing." She turned then, eyes sharp. "You're tired. You've been digging through old things all week. That messes with your head." He opened the yearbook, sliding it across the table. The page fell open easily, as if trained. She glanced at it once, then away. "See," she said, "just words." "You're letting grief talk. Grief didn't write it." "No," she said softly. "Grief is making you imagine things that weren't there." The softness unsettled him more than anger would have. He searched her face for recognition, for fear, for anything that mirrored the pounding in his chest. She gave him concern instead, pity even. "You remember how upset she was that night," she continued. "She stormed out, teenagers do that. She said she'd be back. She said a lot of things." Her voice hardened. "You know how she could be." He did know, or thought he did. The certainty he'd carried for decades began to fray. Memory felt suddenly unreliable, like a witness easily swayed. "You're acting like this means something," she said. "Like we missed some obvious clue." "Didn't we?" She sighed, long and weary. "We did everything we could." "Don't do this to yourself now." The words landed heavy. He closed the book, unsure when his hands had started shaking. Maybe she was right. Maybe time had warped the ink, the meaning, his mind. She stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "We survived because we let things rest," she said. "Don't dig them up." He nodded, because nodding was easier than fighting. As she turned back to the kitchen, the power settled where it always had, quiet and firm. But even as doubt crept in, a smaller, stubborn voice remained. It whispered that some stories were polished by repetition, not truth, and he wasn't sure anymore which one she was telling him. He stayed at the table long after she finished unpacking, listening to the clink of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the life they had built around avoidance. Each sound felt like reinforcement, like evidence stacked neatly against his questions. He told himself again that love required trust, that memory could lie. Yet the ink burned behind his eyes. and no amount of reassurance could make it fade. Silence no longer felt entirely safe.